Thank you all so much for sticking around tonight. Some of those, all of those stories are pretty amazing. It's hard to follow. My name's Jessica De Nova, and I'm going to direct your attention here to the screen behind me. You'll see me in this video. You'll see that I'm reporting live here in Irvine, actually, at UCI. This was back around May 2024. It was a live report for KABC. What you won't see is that when I got off air, I ran to look for the closest thing I could find to a warm compress because my left eye was in so much pain. I'd been dealing with these things called chalazions. And it turns out that we all actually have these glands in our eyelids, and when we blink, they secrete oil to naturally lubricate our eyes. And sometimes those get clogged, and mine had been getting clogged a lot lately. And this one was relentless. It got clogged, it got infected, and it was here to stay, and I eventually ended up looking like this. It's not very flattering. And I couldn't go on air like this. So I called off sick with work. I went to urgent care, ended up talking to several ophthalmologists, and was like, why does this keep happening to me? And they said, okay, well, let's take a look at your life. Because this is probably going to take a few months. It could take a few months to unclog. So they said, you have a high-stress job. Yes. I'm also a mother of two, a 5-year-old and a baby who wasn't even 1 yet. I was nursing, so my hormones were going all over the place as my body readjusted to me returning to work. I was pretty sleep deprived because my baby wasn't sleeping through the night. And my partner is a firefighter, and for those of you who don't know, firefighting shifts last days, so he'd be working. I was on my own a lot. There was a lot going on, and around this time, I was also diagnosed with postpartum depression. So I had a lot that I was working through, and I stepped back and looked at my life and realized that this was my body screaming for me to take care of myself. I had been neglecting my health. So I made a difficult decision with my doctors to go on medical leave. I was worried about my career, but I knew that I wanted to be around in the long run for my career, for my family, for my kids, and for myself. So I connected with a really good primary care physician who holds me accountable. I started going to therapy. I got back into running because I learned early on that running is what unwinds me. It's my zen. It's important early on in your lives to find that healthy outlet for you to unwind and decompress. I hadn't been doing that for months. So, I went back to my ophthalmologist and was like, okay, I'm taking care of myself, my overall wellness, but I need every tool I can possibly use to make sure that these chalazions don't keep coming back because they're really not, going to let me work. They said, okay, well, there's therapy that is proven effective, intense pulsed light therapy, IPL, and it is proven to help the function of these glands. I said, sign me up. So here I am. Might be a little disturbing for some, just a heads up. Enjoying my IPL. Let's take a closer look. I call this my Frankenstein's monster era. And those nails, if you can see them in the back, they're not actually going into my eyes. They're holding the metal shields that protect my eyes from that IPL, from the intense pulsed light. So I'm doing all the things, the IPL, the PCP, the therapy, the running. I'm putting in the work because I have worked too hard for too long to get to where I was, and I wasn't about to lose it all. My American dream started when I was 3 years old. I was born in Mexico, and I was brought to the United States when I was 3. And I grew up undocumented. Who here knows what an undocumented immigrant is? You comfortable answering? Go for it. You're not? Oh, okay. Sorry, behind you? No? Okay, did you want to elaborate on undocumented immigrant? If not, it's okay. Yeah. Oh, I thought I saw you raise your hand. Sorry.
I did, but I don't really know much about it. I just think, is it illegal immigrant?
That's something we hear a lot also, right? Someone who is in the country without legal status, without legal documents, without papers. And I wasn't able to legalize my status until I was almost 30 years old. So that presented a lot of barriers in my life. And I knew at an early age, I had heard what many people in the United States thought about undocumented immigrants like me. I heard the word criminals a lot, along with much worse things that I'm not going to repeat. And I look at myself and my parents, who often worked multiple jobs at crazy hours to make ends meet, to give my siblings and I better opportunities, and I was mad. I was determined to prove all those negative stereotypes wrong. I had heard about the American dream. If you work hard in America, you make it in America. And that's just what I was set out to do. This is me in kindergarten. At the kindergarten graduation ceremony, one student was selected to hold up the American flag, and you know that was your girl. I held up those stars and stripes with pride. And I went on to excel academically. Luckily, I was good at it and I enjoyed it. I became 8th grade class president. I held up a 4.0 GPA. I then became senior class president. And I led my schools in the Pledge of Allegiance morning after morning, ironically, as an undocumented immigrant. I can still recite that thing on the spot, and the Star Spangled Banner, and I can play that one on my flute. And throughout all this, I was very open about my status, oftentimes shocking my friends, my teachers, my counselors, my mentors. You know, they'd tell me that they had never heard about this, that I didn't look like one. They'd say, "Really, you?" "Yeah, me." And I realized that I was bringing awareness. I realized that my story was changing minds. I realized that there was power in my story. Then graduation came, and my counselor tried to help me navigate all the legal questions of the application process, but I wasn't eligible for state or federal financial aid. And my parents, they couldn't help me pay for school out of pocket, so my dreams of going up north or out to the East Coast or even to a 4-year university locally, those dreams were out. My parents had tried to talk to multiple attorneys to, try and figure out if there was a pathway for me, but there just wasn't a pathway at the time. But I decided to turn that struggle into a fork in the road. I decided to pivot, and I thought, well, maybe I can keep sharing my story, I can keep changing minds, and maybe I can help change the law. So I went the community college route instead. And that's where I connected with the Orange County Dream Team, or the OCDT. We were a group, a grassroots organization of students and allies who worked to educate and advocate for the rights of undocumented students of all nationalities. We organized workshops, educational forums to share our stories. We connected with local and congressional representatives to find someone to champion our cause. We fundraised for scholarships for undocumented immigrants. It wasn't my original college dream, but it was a dream. I was building community, making lifelong friendships, informing my community. I was learning to network. I was growing stronger through this struggle, gaining skills that I've used time and time again since then. I'm using them right now. And finally, graduation out of college came, and I still didn't have my papers. There still wasn't a change in the laws, but I did have my pre-med courses completed, and I did have a degree in biology, because remember, I set that bar high. I wanted to prove all those negative stereotypes wrong, so I'd look for the hardest things I could possibly do, and I decided I was going to apply to med school. That's where I was going. I was going to be a doctor. But I couldn't apply because of my undocumented status. Around that time, my now husband landed his first job as a firefighter in Oregon, so I thought, okay, maybe I can use that time if we go to Oregon to study for my MCATs, the entrance exam for medical school. I can see if there's anything I can do about my status over there and see if I can change any minds up there. So off we go to Oregon. I start doing my thing, sharing my story, networking. I end up volunteering in a church choir, playing my flute. And that eventually led to a great friendship and amazing mentorship in the news industry. I helped out at a women's clinic. And there I discovered that I'm sort of a germaphobe and maybe medicine wasn't going to work for me. And just know that it's just as important to know what you like to do to discover that as it is, to discover what you don't like to do as it is to discover what you like to do. So don't just focus on, what you love and what your passion's going to be. Also, take the time to cross things off your list. So I realized at that point in my life that I was sort of a natural storyteller. I really enjoyed it, and I started thinking about journalism. We end up at a friend's wedding, and I see this woman there, and she looks so familiar, and I realize she's a local anchor. So I went up to her when I saw that she was in line for the bathroom, because she wasn't going anywhere. She was in line for the bathroom. I remember putting my beer down, looking at my husband and saying, I'm going to get me a news job. So off I go in line behind her and get to know her, and she invites me to go shadow one of their reporters to see what journalism and reporting are all about. And I followed up. I called, I made the appointment, and I shadowed that reporter. It's important for you all to follow up. So many people don't follow up. Please follow up because you'll already be ahead of the game. I shadowed the reporter, and I was in love. I met the executive producer right after, and she goes, well, if you're interested, we're hiring. I was like, whew, I'm interested, but I'm a pre-med student. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm a fast learner. She said, okay, well, if you get the job, we will teach you everything you need to know here. And I said, okay, great, but also I'm undocumented, and I did find an attorney here in Oregon that is helping me out with my immigration case, but he did warn me that any day now I should hear that I'm going to get a work permit or that I'm going to get kicked out of the country. I'm going to get deported. And she's like, what? You have no accent. Like, what do you mean you're undocumented? I told her my whole story. She was blown away. She said, really, you? Yes, me. And she said, okay, let's do this. If you're interested, apply. Keep me posted on your immigration case, and we'll be in touch. I said, okay. So off I go to my next immigration appointment in Portland. And for those of you who don't know and aren't familiar with the process, it's not you marry a U.S. citizen and you're in. Every case is different. And for me, I had been at this point, I think, about 7 years with my now husband, and it was a grueling process filled with interviews, having to prove the legitimacy of the relationship. You don't just check boxes. The decision is made by someone who never meets you. At least in my case, I never met the person. And, they make you think back. I was 3. They want details that you just can't possibly remember. It's not an easy process. Luckily for me, at that appointment, I found out that I was at least going to get my work permit. And later on, I was allowed the opportunity to go through the process that America promises. And I was able to become a legal resident and then get my U.S. citizenship. So grateful to have had that opportunity. But at that moment, all I knew I had was my work permit. And I leave with my work permit. I'm never going to forget driving out of Portland on that bridge. My phone rings, and it's that executive producer, and she says, do you have an update on your work permit? I said, yeah, I just left my appointment, and I got approved for my work permit. And she says, great, then you got the job. The stars had finally aligned for me. I was going to make storytelling my career. And what I really wanted to do was to be back here in Orange County, uplifting my community stories. But I had a lot of work to do because the news market, the way it works is it's based off of the viewership in a geographic area. So New York, for example, the national news, that's number 1. Anybody in the nation can watch those newscasts. Where I wanted to get, LA, that's the number 2 market. Where I was 139. So I had a lot of work to do. I put my head down, I learned. Luckily, I had really good teachers there. When my contract finished there, I started applying to move my way up. I heard a lot of no's. I did some time in radio. I freelanced. And around that time, I also found out that a friend of mine was working in Arizona, and she connected me with the news director there. So I applied when there was an opening, and I reached out, always leading with my story. This is who I am. This is why I want to tell stories in my community. And I applied, and I didn't get the job. And then an opening came up later. I applied again, didn't get the job. I must have applied to a position there at least 5 times, maybe more, and eventually they said yes. So now I'm in market 12. Arizona was an amazing experience, but at the end of that contract, I knew that I had the skills and experience to finally apply to the LA market. So I go for it, and then I reach out to the news directors via email, social media, phone calls, any way I could contact them, always leading with my story, being authentic to who I am. And I heard back from several who said, we're just not hiring right now. But one of them, the news director at the time at KABC, got back to me and said, your immigration story, that's what stood out to me. That's who I want to shine through on air. And I said, good, because that's who I'll always be. And I had the job. It was a dream come true, telling stories in my community, and the first, contract just passed in the blink of an eye. And I was up for my second contract. They told me, we love the work you're doing. We want to re-sign you. I said, great. I re-signed, and I was back at it. And then that brings us to the time of my buddy, my Calazian. Remember, I went on medical leave. I put in the work with the IPL, the overall wellness plan, and I'm happy to report that I haven't had a Calazian since I completed all of that, and I still feel great. I'm keeping up with my running and, feel amazing. I went back to work refreshed, 150%, and just a few months after returning to work, my contract was up again. While I was gone on medical leave, we had some changes, and we were under new management, and I was informed that my contract was not going to be re-signed this time. I fought, and when it became clear that we weren't going to reach an agreement, I left my dream job. That was just this past summer. I stand before you all here vulnerable, in the middle of my latest struggle, because that's life. It's not always going to be, pretty and you tied up with a bow. I'm 40, and I'm unemployed. It's going to happen. Sometimes things are out of your hands, they're out of your control, and I grieved my loss. It's important to mourn your losses, but you eventually have to find that fork in the road, you have to pivot, and you have to pave a new path. And luckily for me, I've gotten pretty good at that, and it's key to always lead with my story, to be true and authentic. And I encourage you all to go out and do the same. Share your stories and listen to other stories. Connect, find common ground. You never know what opportunities it may lead to. And empathize. Empathize. Look around in your communities. There are so many people in need of empathy. If I hadn't been gifted others' empathy, I know I wouldn't have been able to achieve so many of the things that I've been able to. Right? If you are gifted the opportunity to listen to another person's story and lend a helping hand, reach out, because what could be a simple act of kindness to you could mean the world to someone else in their greatest time of need. Thank you.